I gave my parents a luxurious 10-day trip to Europe with me. When I picked them up to go to the airport, they told me they decided to go with my jobless sister instead of me. My mother smiled. Your sister needed some rest, so we decided to take her. I did not say anything. They had a big surprise when they landed in Europe. The digital clock on my bedside table flipped to exactly 4:30 in the morning, but my eyes were already wide open. I had been staring at the dark shadows on the ceiling for at least 2 hours, my heart doing little nervous flips of sheer excitement inside my chest. Today was the day. After 2 long, exhausting years of saving every extra penny, working late nights until my eyes burned, and sacrificing my own weekends, I was finally taking my parents on a 10-day luxury trip to Europe. I threw off the heavy winter covers and stepped out of bed. The hardwood floor felt cold against my bare feet, but I did not care. I walked into the kitchen to start the coffee maker. The quiet, rhythmic hum of the machine was the only sound in my silent house. I stood there in the soft, pale morning light, leaning my hip against the granite counter, and allowed myself a moment to feel truly proud of what I had accomplished. 2 years ago, I received a major promotion at my corporate marketing job. The new title came with a significant bump in my salary, and instead of upgrading my car or moving into a fancier apartment downtown, I opened a separate, high-yield savings account. I wanted to do something massive for my parents. They had gone through a really rough patch recently. Just last year, they had to pay for my aunt's unexpected funeral expenses, which had completely wiped out their small retirement fund. It broke my heart to see them struggling and worrying about grocery bills at their age. I wanted to give them an experience they would never forget, a chance to be pampered and treated like absolute royalty for 10 glorious days. I poured my coffee into a silver travel mug, the rich, earthy scent of the dark roast filling the kitchen air. I wrapped both hands around the warm metal and walked back into my bedroom to look at my open suitcase resting on the mattress. Inside were my carefully folded evening gowns, wrapped in protective plastic. I had packed comfortable walking shoes for the ancient cobblestone streets of Rome, a lightweight trench coat for the breezy evenings in Paris, and a thick, leather-bound itinerary folder. That folder was my absolute masterpiece. I had planned every single detail with military precision. We had first-class flight tickets. We had reservations at 5-star boutique hotels with private balcony views of the Eiffel Tower. I had booked private, skip-the-line guided tours of the Colosseum and the Louvre. I had even secured dinner reservations at 3 different Michelin-starred restaurants. I upgraded our train passes so we could travel across the lush European countryside in absolute, undeniable comfort. I zipped up the suitcase, the sound loud in the quiet room. I grabbed my car keys, my purse, and my travel mug, and walked out the front door. The morning air was crisp, biting my cheeks as I loaded my luggage into the trunk of my car. The streets of my neighborhood were completely empty as I drove across town toward my parents' house. I had the radio turned down very low, playing some soft acoustic music. I kept picturing the look on my mother's face when she saw the plush, reclining seats on the airplane. I pictured my father's reaction when we walked into the grand, marble lobby of our hotel in Paris. They deserved this more than anyone. They had worked hard their entire lives, raising 2 daughters, and it felt so incredibly good to be the successful daughter who could finally give back to them in such a monumental way. I pulled into their familiar driveway. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my tires. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was exactly 6:02 in the morning. I was exactly 2 minutes late. I chuckled to myself, turned off the engine, and stepped out of the car. The porch light was on, casting a warm, inviting yellow glow over the front steps. The heavy wooden front door creaked open, and my mother stepped out onto the porch. She was pulling her large, navy blue suitcase behind her. She was wearing her nice traveling slacks and a fresh coat of lipstick. "You are late," my mother said, her voice teasing but slightly edged with her usual impatience as she maneuvered the wheels of her luggage over the door threshold. 2 minutes late, Mom, I said, forcing a bright, cheerful smile onto my face. I walked up the driveway to help her with the heavy bag. But as I reached for the thick plastic handle of her suitcase, the front door swung wide open again. Someone else was stepping out of the house. I froze mid-step. My hand hovered in the air. It was my younger sister, Tamsin. She was dragging her own massive, hard-shell designer suitcase, her expensive memory foam travel pillow already clipped around her neck. She had an iced coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, even though the sun had not even fully risen yet. My smile vanished instantly. My hand dropped numbly to my side. I looked from Tamsin to my mother, my brain struggling violently to process what I was seeing. Tamsin did not have a job. In fact, she had been unemployed for the better part of a year, mostly because she was going through a very bitter, very messy divorce. She was constantly fighting with her ex-husband over the custody of their golden retriever, and she spent most of her days complaining about her expensive lawyer. She had already blown through the small inheritance our grandmother left us a few years ago. She lived in an overpriced apartment she could not afford, constantly borrowed money from our parents, and never once offered to help them with anything around their house. "What is going on?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the slight, pathetic tremble in my own words. My mom turned to me. Her expression was entirely too cheerful for the bizarre situation unfolding on the porch. It was that tight, forced pleasantness she always used when she knew she was doing something completely unreasonable and wanted to bulldoze her way through it. "Oh, Blythe," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "We decided Tamsin should come instead of you. She has been so stressed lately with the lawyers and the divorce, and she really needs this trip to clear her head." My chest tightened so fast it felt like the breath had been physically punched out of my lungs. I took a heavy step back, the gravel crunching loudly under my shoes again. I stared at my mother, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke. But her face remained set in that stubborn, polite smile. "Instead of me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Mom, I have been planning this for 2 entire years. I paid for everything. Every single cent came from my bank account." My mother sighed, a short, sharp, impatient sound, exactly as if I had just pointed out something incredibly trivial and annoying, like a spot on the rug. "And we are very grateful, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to pat my arm patronizingly. I flinched away from her touch. "But you are always working so hard. You make a great salary now. You can easily take another trip later, whenever you want. Tamsin really needs this right now. You know how hard things have been for her. She does not have the money to do things like this." I slowly turned my head to look at Tamsin. I expected to see at least a flicker of guilt, maybe a slight apologetic grimace, or even a hint of shame. Instead, Tamsin just smirked at me. She shifted her weight onto one hip, took a slow, loud sip of her iced coffee, and looked right into my eyes from behind her dark sunglasses. "Thanks for understanding, sis," Tamsin said. Her tone was dripping with absolute, fake gratitude. She sounded like she had just won a prize in a contest she did not even enter, and she was gloating about it to the loser. I stared at the two of them. My heart was pounding furiously against my ribs, beating so hard it hurt. A hot, searing flash of anger crawled up the back of my neck, making my skin prickle. At that exact moment, the screen door pushed open again, and my dad shuffled out onto the porch. He was holding his worn leather overnight bag. The moment he saw me standing there at the bottom of the steps, his shoulders slumped forward, and he actively, purposefully avoided looking at my eyes. He walked down the wooden steps and handed me his suitcase without saying a single word to me. He looked like a coward. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking with raw, unfiltered emotion. "This was supposed to be our trip. This was something I built for us. Something for me to share with you to celebrate everything we have been through." "Well, it still is our trip," my mom said smoothly, flashing another tight, inflexible smile. "Just with Tamsin instead of you. Please do not make this a big deal, Blythe. Your sister really needs a mental health break, and we need to get to the airport right now." Traffic is going to be terrible, and we cannot miss our flight. I stood there in the cool morning air, feeling a profound, crushing sense of isolation wash over my entire body. For the past 2 years, I had poured my heart, my precious time, and my hard-earned finances into this gift. I had skipped dinners out with my friends. I had worked through major holidays. I had meticulously planned every detail so my parents would feel loved, appreciated, and cared for. But standing in their driveway, watching Tamsin casually adjust her expensive designer sunglasses, I realized a cold, hard, terrifying truth I had been avoiding my entire adult life. It did not matter how much effort I put in. It did not matter how responsible I was, or how much I provided for them financially. In their eyes, Tamsin would always come first. She was the eternal victim who constantly needed saving, and I was just the reliable, invisible workhorse expected to pull the family wagon in silence. They even drained the college fund they had started for me to bail Tamsin out of credit card debt a decade ago. It was a pattern, and I was the only one paying the price. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached in my gums. I bit back the sharp, furious, screaming retort that was burning on the tip of my tongue. If I screamed right now, if I caused a massive scene on the front lawn, they would just call me dramatic. They would twist the entire narrative to make me the villain who ruined Tamsin's fragile mental health recovery. They would make themselves the victims of my temper. Instead of screaming, I took a very slow, very deep breath. I forced a tight, entirely unfeeling, robotic smile onto my face. "Let us get going then," I said. My voice was completely flat, completely devoid of any warmth or affection. I walked around to the back of my car and popped the trunk open. I lifted my mother's heavy suitcase and shoved it forcefully inside, not caring if it scraped against the metal. Then I grabbed my dad's leather bag and tossed it in next to it. Finally, Tamsin rolled her massive, heavy hardshell suitcase over to the bumper and stood there, clearly expecting me to lift it for her like a hired bellhop. I stared at her perfectly manicured hands, then stared at her face, and walked away to the driver's side door without laying a single finger on her bag. I heard her huff loudly in sheer annoyance before she struggled to lift the heavy luggage into the trunk herself, grunting with the effort. I got into the driver's seat and gripped the leather steering wheel. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, that was fine. They had made their bed. They could go with her. But I was absolutely not about to let them enjoy the fruits of my labor in peace. A dark, quiet plan was already forming in the back of my mind. The drive to the airport was agonizingly long. The silence in the car was thick, heavy, and suffocating, punctuated only by Tamsin's incessant, cheerful, oblivious chatter from the back seat. "Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that video about the shopping districts in Paris on the internet?" Tamsin squealed, leaning forward so her head was poking between the two front seats. "I absolutely cannot wait to go shopping. Do you think we will have time to hit the designer boutiques, or will the guided tours take up the whole day? I really need some new shoes." My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. The leather creaked loudly under my knuckles. I stared straight ahead at the highway, watching the white dashed lines blur past my windshield. I forced myself to keep my mouth shut, breathing through my nose. My mom chuckled softly from the passenger seat, sounding completely relaxed. "Of course we will have time, honey. We will figure it all out when we get there. We are on vacation time now." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. "When we get there." They did not even seem to notice or care that I was completely erased from that equation. I was just their personal chauffeur now, driving them to a luxurious vacation I had funded with my own blood, sweat, and tears. They were talking about my itinerary as if it was a gift that had magically fallen from the sky. About 20 minutes into the torturous drive, my dad cleared his throat from the back seat. "Thank you for driving us, Blythe," he said quietly, his voice lacking any real conviction. "I know this probably feels unusual." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was looking out the side window, his expression troubled but passive, as always. Unusual, I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the tense air for a long second. That is a very interesting way to put it, Dad. He did not respond. He just shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking like he deeply regretted opening his mouth. He always took the path of least resistance, and right now, the path of least resistance was letting my mother and sister walk all over me. Tamsin leaned forward again, her voice grating against my nerves like rough sandpaper. "You are not mad, right?" she asked, though there was zero genuine concern in her tone. She was baiting me. "I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go in your place. I could never have afforded this on my own, what with the lawyer fees for the custody battle over the dog and everything. It has been a nightmare." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. I forced my mouth into a thin, hard line. "Of course, Tamsin. Enjoy the trip. Take lots of pictures." By the time we finally pulled up to the airport drop-off zone, my patience was completely worn down to the absolute bone. The area was chaotic, filled with honking taxis, rushing passengers, and the heavy smell of exhaust fumes. I put the car in park and stepped out into the noise. I walked to the back of the car and opened the trunk, stepping aside as my dad pulled the heavy luggage out onto the concrete sidewalk. My mom walked over to me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders for a brief, obligatory, performative hug. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart," she said, patting my back as if I were a child who had just shared a toy. "This means a lot to us, and it means the absolute world to Tamsin." I did not lift my arms to hug her back. I just stood there rigidly and nodded stiffly. "Sure, Mom. Have a safe flight." Tamsin grabbed the handle of her suitcase and beamed a radiant, victorious smile at me. "Thanks, Blythe. You are the best sister ever." I stood by the open trunk of my car and watched them walk away from me. They merged into the thick crowd of travelers, chatting excitedly, completely unbothered by the fact that they were leaving me behind on the dirty pavement. I watched until they disappeared through the sliding glass doors of the terminal, swallowed up by the building. My chest was incredibly tight, completely filled with a toxic mixture of overwhelming anger, profound hurt, and bitter betrayal. I got back into my car, slammed the door shut, and merged back onto the highway heading toward my house. The ride back was a complete, silent blur. The morning sun was fully up now, shining brightly through the windshield, but I felt incredibly cold inside. I kept replaying the conversation on the porch over and over in my head. Every single word they had said cut deeper than the last, slicing away years of familial obligation. "This means a lot to Tamsin. You are not mad, right? You make a great salary now." I pulled into my own driveway, put the car in park, and turned off the engine. I did not get out right away. I just sat there in the heavy, oppressive silence of the car, gripping the steering wheel until my hands physically ached. A single, hot tear escaped and rolled down my cheek, but I wiped it away furiously with the back of my hand. I was done crying. I was done being the reliable, understanding, accommodating daughter who just took whatever miserable scraps of affection they decided to throw my way. I was done paying for their mistakes and funding their favoritism. Without a second thought, I pushed the car door open, marched up my front steps, and unlocked my front door. I did not bother taking off my coat. I walked straight down the hallway into my home office, sat down heavily at my desk, and pulled my laptop toward me. I flipped the screen open, the bright light illuminating my determined face. I opened my email application and typed the name of the travel agency into the search bar. My hands were moving incredibly fast, fueled by pure, unadulterated adrenaline and righteous fury. I found the master itinerary folder, the one that contained the confirmation numbers for every single booking. First, I logged into the international airline portal. I had booked premium economy seats for them, and a first-class seat for myself. I clicked on the master reservation. I selected the option to cancel my first-class ticket entirely, requesting a full refund to my credit card. Then, I looked at their premium seats. With a few sharp clicks of the mouse, I downgraded their tickets to the absolute lowest tier of basic economy. No advanced seat selection, no extra legroom, no complimentary meals, and a strict limit on baggage. The airline immediately refunded the difference to my account. Next, I opened the hotel reservations. We were supposed to stay at a stunning, historic boutique hotel in the center of Paris for the first 3 nights. The total cost was astronomical, paid entirely on my personal credit card months in advance. I clicked the bright red button that read Cancel Reservation. A prompt popped up on the screen asking if I was sure, warning me about standard cancellation policies. I did not care. I clicked Confirm. The reservation vanished. I moved systematically, coldly, through the entire 10-day itinerary. I cancelled the private, VIP tour of the Louvre Museum. I cancelled the romantic sunset boat cruise on the Seine River. I cancelled the luxury, first-class train tickets from France to Italy. I cancelled the sprawling, 5-star resort suite in Rome. I cancelled the guided, expensive food and wine tour in Florence. I cancelled every single dinner reservation at every high-end restaurant I had spent months calling and securing. I sat back in my desk chair and stared at the screen as the automated confirmation emails began flooding into my inbox, piling up one after another in rapid succession. Reservation cancelled. Booking refunded. Tour terminated. Payment reversed. As I watched the emails roll in, the terrible, suffocating tightness in my chest finally started to ease. A deep, settling, incredibly warm sense of profound satisfaction washed over my entire body. They wanted to take Tamsin instead of me. That was perfectly fine. They had made their choice as adults. But they were absolutely not going to be staying in luxury suites, eating gourmet food, or enjoying private chauffeurs on my dime. They wanted a family vacation? They could pay for it themselves. I closed the laptop with a sharp, echoing snap. They could explain themselves to the confused front desk staff in Paris. I was completely done being their doormat. I stood up from the desk and walked back into my bedroom. I looked at my packed suitcase, still sitting at the foot of the bed. The irony of the situation was heavy in the air. I slowly unzipped the bag and began taking out the clothes I had packed with so much joyful anticipation just a few hours ago. I hung my evening dresses back in the closet, carefully smoothing out the delicate fabric. I placed my comfortable walking shoes back on the bottom rack of my shoe organizer. I put my toiletries back in the bathroom cabinet. The house was wonderfully, beautifully quiet. I spent the next several hours reclaiming my Saturday. I did laundry. I cleaned the kitchen. I watered my plants. I made myself a nice, elaborate lunch and ate it in silence, enjoying the peace of my own home. I felt lighter than I had in years. About 10 hours later, the peace was violently shattered. My cell phone, which was sitting on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate wildly. It danced aggressively across the granite surface, buzzing with a relentless, angry energy that demanded immediate attention. I walked over slowly and looked down at the bright screen. My mother's name was flashing brightly, accompanied by notifications for 5 missed calls and a dozen unread text messages. I leaned against the counter, picked up the phone, and slowly unlocked the screen. I opened the message thread with my mom. I read the messages out loud to the empty room. Blythe, what is going on? The hotel manager is telling us they will not let us check in. The front desk says the reservation is completely missing. They say it was cancelled this morning. Call me immediately. Blythe, this is not funny at all. Fix this right now. We have been traveling all day, we are exhausted, and Tamsin is crying in the lobby. A genuine, loud laugh escaped my lips before I could even stop it. Fix this. They really, truly thought I would swoop in from across the ocean and save the day after what they had just done to me on my own front porch. They thought I would pull out my credit card, apologize to them for the inconvenience, and rebook everything at the last minute just to make sure Tamsin had a comfortable, fluffy bed to sleep in. The audacity was staggering. The phone buzzed heavily in my hand again. This time, the screen showed an incoming call from Tamsin. I stared at her smiling contact photo for a long moment, feeling absolutely nothing, then pressed the red button to send her straight to voicemail. Less than a minute later, a notification popped up on the screen. New voicemail from Tamsin. I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear, genuinely curious to hear what kind of mental gymnastics she would use to blame this on me. Blythe, you are being incredibly petty, Tamsin's voice snapped harshly through the small speaker. She sounded absolutely furious, her tone dripping with absolute entitlement and rage. We are stuck in the hotel lobby with all our luggage because of you. Mom is very upset and Dad is stressing out. You need to call the hotel and fix your stupid mistake right now. Stop throwing a childish tantrum and handle this. Call me back immediately. I rolled my eyes, pulled the phone away from my ear, and deleted the voicemail before the automated voice could even offer to save it. For years, I had been their designated family fixer. I was the one who smoothed over every argument, paid for every unexpected medical or legal expense, and picked up every single piece of slack Tamsin left behind while she coasted through life. But that version of me died on the gravel driveway this morning. I was retired from that job. I set the phone down on the counter and walked over to the stove to put the kettle on. I wanted a cup of tea. I let the water boil, the high-pitched whistling sound filling the kitchen. I poured the steaming hot water over a chamomile tea bag in my favorite ceramic mug and watched the clear water slowly turn a deep golden color. The phone started ringing again. It was my mother. The ringing was persistent, demanding, and loud. I took a slow, careful sip of my hot tea. Eventually, I decided I should answer the phone, if only to stop the relentless barrage of incoming calls and to make my stance crystal clear to all of them. I swiped the green button on the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Hello, I said calmly, leaning against the counter. My mother's voice hit me like a massive tidal wave of panic and anger the second the line connected. Blythe. What did you do? She practically screamed into the receiver, her voice shrill and echoing. The hotel manager says the reservation was cancelled this morning. And I just checked the travel app for our private museum tour tomorrow, and it says that is gone too. What is happening? The staff here is being incredibly rude to us. I let her rant for a moment, listening to the chaotic background noise of the busy hotel lobby in Paris. I could hear people speaking French, luggage wheels rolling on marble floors, and Tamsin complaining loudly in the background. I took another slow sip of my chamomile tea, savoring the soothing warmth sliding down my throat. I cancelled them, I replied. My voice was completely even, totally devoid of the frantic panic she was projecting through the phone. There was a very long, very heavy, incredibly stunned silence on the other end of the line. The background noise seemed to fade as my mother processed my words. Finally, my mother hissed into the receiver, her voice dropping to an angry whisper. Why on earth would you do that? Are you out of your mind? Oh, I do not know, Mom, I said, letting a heavy, thick dose of cold sarcasm lace my words. Maybe because you decided to take Tamsin on my trip. The trip I spent 2 years planning. The trip I paid for with my own salary. We thought you would understand, she snapped back loudly, her voice rising in defensive anger. We told you Tamsin has been struggling with the divorce. We thought you would be generous. Understand what? I asked, my own voice finally rising, the suppressed anger breaking through my calm facade. That 2 entire years of me saving my money, working late, and planning every single detail did not matter because Tamsin needed a break from her own messy life? That my hard work meant absolutely nothing to you as long as she was happy? You replaced me on my own vacation, Mom. Blythe, you are being completely unreasonable, my mother argued, trying to take the moral high ground. We are family. You do not just strand your family in a foreign country with no place to sleep. I did not strand you anywhere, I corrected her sharply, my tone like ice. I drove you to the airport. You have your return flights back home. But guess what, Mom? I do not understand, and I do not care to try anymore. You wanted a luxury vacation with Tamsin instead of me, so you can figure out how to pay for it yourselves. Tell Tamsin to use her credit card. Blythe, do not you dare hang up this phone. I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the red button, and ended the call abruptly. My hands were shaking slightly, but it was not from fear or sadness. It was pure, exhilarating adrenaline. I walked over to the living room sofa, tossed the phone onto the soft cushions, and sat down. I looked around my quiet, perfectly peaceful living room. The silence that followed the phone call was absolutely blissful. I felt like I could take a full, deep breath of air for the first time in years. If they wanted to prioritize Tamsin, that was their choice. But they were going to have to navigate the financial and logistical consequences of that choice entirely without me. If you have made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get back to my story. The next morning, I woke up without the shrill sound of an alarm clock. I lay in my bed for a long time, just watching the early morning sunlight filter through the wooden blinds and cast long, straight shadows across my bedroom floor. I stretched my legs beneath the heavy cotton sheets. For the first time in over 2 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of family expectations pressing down on my chest. I threw off the covers, walked into the kitchen, and decided to make myself a proper breakfast. I did not rush. I took a carton of eggs from the refrigerator. I cracked 2 eggs into a ceramic bowl, whisked them slowly with a metal fork, and poured them into a hot skillet with melting butter. I toasted 2 thick slices of sourdough bread and brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee. While I ate my breakfast at the small wooden dining table, I focused entirely on the taste of the food and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I did not look at my phone. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, face down. I spent the next 3 hours deep cleaning my house. I wanted to scrub away the lingering negativity of the previous day. I tied my hair back, put on a pair of yellow rubber gloves, and scrubbed the kitchen sink until the stainless steel gleamed. I wiped down the baseboards in the hallway. I vacuumed the living room rug. Around noon, I finally peeled off the rubber gloves and picked up my phone. The screen immediately lit up with a barrage of notifications. There were 15 new text messages from my mother. I unlocked the screen and opened our message thread. Blythe, you have completely ruined everything, the first text read. Tamsin is hysterical in the hotel lobby. We cannot afford the walk-in rates for these rooms. Your father is trying to find a cheaper place, but everything is booked. How could you be so incredibly selfish? Answer your phone right now. You need to wire us money from your savings account. I read the words slowly, tracing the letters with my eyes. I felt a slight twinge of guilt try to creep into my stomach, but I quickly pushed it away. They were not my responsibility. They had made a conscious decision to deceive me and replace me. I set the phone back down on the counter. I did not reply. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let the hot water wash over my tired muscles. When I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a thick towel around my hair, I heard the phone ringing from the kitchen. It was a loud, persistent ring. I walked out, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor, and looked at the screen. It was my mother again. I decided it was time to put a permanent end to her delusions. I picked up the phone and swiped the green button to accept the call. Blythe. Finally, my mother yelled into the receiver. The background noise was different this time. It sounded like they were standing on a busy street corner. I could hear cars honking and the faint sound of a police siren in the distance. Hello, Mom, I said smoothly. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. Do not you dare use that calm tone with me, she snapped. Her voice was trembling with rage and exhaustion. We are standing outside on the sidewalk with all of our heavy luggage. We had to leave the nice hotel because the manager told us we would have to pay $400 a night to rebook the rooms you cancelled. We do not have that kind of money, Blythe. That sounds like a very difficult situation to navigate, I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of sympathy. It is a disaster, she screamed. Tamsin is sitting on her suitcase crying her eyes out. She is going through a terrible divorce. She has expensive lawyer fees. She needs a soft bed to sleep in. You make a fantastic salary since your promotion last year. You have plenty of money in the bank. You need to call a hotel right now, give them your credit card number, and book us 3 rooms. I gripped the phone tighter. The absolute audacity of her demand sent a hot wave of anger straight through my veins. Absolutely not, I said. My voice was firm and unyielding. My salary is not a public charity fund for this family. I earned my promotion by working 60-hour weeks while Tamsin sat in her apartment complaining about her life. I saved my money for 2 years to treat you and Dad to a luxury vacation. You chose to secretly bring Tamsin instead. You made your choice, Mom. She's your sister, my mother pleaded, trying to shift tactics to manipulate my emotions. We are a family. We are supposed to take care of each other when things get hard. No, Mom, I corrected her sharply. You take care of Tamsin. You have always taken care of Tamsin. You drained the college fund you promised me just to pay off her credit card debt 5 years ago. You constantly bail her out. I am done playing this game. If Tamsin needs a hotel room so badly, she can use the settlement money from her divorce. Have a terrible trip. I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button, and immediately powered the device completely off. The screen went black. I tossed the phone onto my nightstand. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My heart was beating rapidly, but I felt incredibly powerful. I had finally drawn a thick, solid line in the sand, and I was not going to let them cross it ever again. The next 4 days were the most peaceful days I had experienced in my entire adult life. With my phone turned off, I was completely disconnected from their manufactured drama and their constant, draining demands. I decided to spend my unexpected time off from work focusing entirely on myself and my own home. On Tuesday morning, I drove to the local hardware store. I walked down the bright aisles, breathing in the scent of cut lumber and fresh paint. I bought 2 gallons of a soft, calming sage green paint, several wide brushes, a plastic drop cloth, and a roll of blue painter's tape. I drove back home, changed into an old, faded college t-shirt and worn-out sweatpants, and began to prep my spare bedroom. I spent hours carefully applying the blue tape along the baseboards, the window frames, and the ceiling edges. It was meticulous, repetitive work, but I found it incredibly soothing. I poured the thick green paint into a plastic tray, dipped my roller into it, and began to transform the room. As I rolled the color onto the blank white walls, I felt like I was physically covering up all the years of stress and anxiety my family had caused me. I did not have to worry about Tamsin calling me to complain about her custody battle over her dog. I did not have to listen to my mother make excuses for her. I was just a woman painting a room in her quiet, safe house. That evening, after I washed the green paint off my hands, I went into the kitchen and decided to cook a complicated meal just for myself. I did not order takeout. I made lasagna entirely from scratch. I simmered crushed tomatoes, garlic, and fresh basil in a heavy pot for 2 hours. I boiled the wide pasta noodles until they were perfectly tender. I layered the rich meat sauce, creamy ricotta cheese, and fresh mozzarella into a deep glass baking dish. When I pulled the bubbling, golden brown lasagna out of the oven, the entire house smelled like a rustic Italian kitchen. I poured myself a large glass of red wine, sat at the table, and ate my dinner in wonderful, uninterrupted silence. By Friday morning, curiosity finally got the better of me. I had been disconnected from the world for almost a week. I walked into my bedroom, picked up my black phone from the nightstand, and held down the power button. The screen glowed bright white, displaying the brand logo, before finally loading the home screen. Instantly, the phone began vibrating violently in my hand. It chimed continuously for 2 full minutes as a massive flood of notifications poured in. I had dozens of missed calls, endless text messages, and 7 new voicemails. I carried the phone into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of hot coffee, and sat down at the table. I tapped the voicemail icon and pressed play on the first message. Blythe, it is Tamsin, her voice whined through the speaker. She sounded congested, like she had been crying for hours. You are a horrible, vindictive person. We had to spend our first 2 nights in a disgusting, cheap hostel with shared bathrooms. Someone stole Mom's expensive face cream. My back is killing me because the mattress is basically a rock. You ruined my one chance to escape the stress of my lawyer and my terrible ex-husband. I will never, ever forgive you for this. I took a sip of my coffee. I felt absolutely zero sympathy for her. I pressed the delete button. The next voicemail was from my father. His voice sounded heavy, tired, and deeply defeated. Hi, Blythe. It is Dad. We are in Florence right now. We had to take a very long, very uncomfortable bus ride because we could not afford the train tickets you cancelled. Your mother is furious, and Tamsin has not stopped complaining since we landed. I do not understand why you had to be so extreme. You know how your mother is. You know how fragile Tamsin is, especially since her grandfather's funeral last year. Could you not have just let them have this one nice thing? Please turn your phone on and call us. I stopped the playback. I stared out the kitchen window at the green leaves of the oak tree in my backyard. My father's message was actually worse than my mother's screaming. He was using his classic manipulation tactic. He was playing the exhausted peacemaker, trying to guilt me into compliance by reminding me of past family tragedies like a funeral that happened 12 months ago. He wanted me to be the bigger person so he would not have to deal with the consequences of his wife and his favorite daughter. I deleted his voicemail, along with all the others, without listening to the rest. I realized that they were not actually sorry for hurting me. They were only sorry that I had stopped funding their lifestyle. Just as I set the phone down, the front doorbell rang. The loud chime startled me. I stood up, walked down the hallway, and looked through the glass peephole. It was my best friend, Nola. She was standing on my front porch wearing a bright yellow sundress. She was holding a cardboard drink carrier with 2 large iced lattes and a white paper bakery bag. I quickly unlocked the door and pulled it open. Nola. What are you doing here? I asked, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in days. I came to check on my favorite fugitive, Nola said, stepping inside and handing me the drink carrier. I have been calling you for 4 days. I actually drove by twice to make sure your car was still in the driveway. I brought blueberry muffins and extra espresso. I am so sorry, I said, leading her through the hallway and out the back door onto my wooden patio. The morning sun was warm and pleasant. I turned my phone off. I just needed to completely disconnect from everything. We sat down on the comfortable outdoor wicker chairs. I pulled an iced latte from the carrier and took a long drink. The cold, sweet espresso was exactly what I needed. I figured as much, Nola said, unwrapping a large muffin and taking a bite. She chewed thoughtfully, then looked at me with serious, dark brown eyes. Your mother called me on Wednesday. I nearly choked on my coffee. I set the plastic cup down on the glass patio table. She called you? From Europe? What on earth did she say? Nola rolled her eyes dramatically and leaned back in her chair. She was absolutely hysterical. She tried to recruit me as her personal flying monkey. She told me you had a massive mental breakdown, cancelled their dream vacation out of pure jealousy, and stranded them in Paris with no money. She begged me to drive to your house, knock on your door, and convince you to wire them $3,000. I covered my face with my hands and let out a long, heavy groan. Please tell me you did not fall for it. Are you kidding me? Nola laughed loudly. I have known you since high school, Blythe. I know exactly how they treat you. I told your mother that you were probably busy enjoying the money you earned from your promotion, And that she should ask Tamsin to pay for the hotel since Tamsin is the one on the vacation. I dropped my hands and stared at her in absolute awe. You actually said that to my mother? I absolutely did, Nola said proudly, taking another sip of her iced latte. And then I hung up the phone. Honestly, Blythe, I am so incredibly proud of you. You finally stood up for yourself. I know how hard that is, especially with them. Do you remember when they took the money from your college fund to pay off Tamsin's credit cards, and you just smiled and took out student loans instead? I nodded slowly, the memory still bitter in my mind. I remember. I was trying to be the good daughter. Well, you are done being the good daughter, Nola said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Do not let them drag you back down when they get home. You hold your ground. Nola's words stuck with me long after she finished her muffin and drove back to her own house. She was right. I had spent my entire adult life bending over backward, trying to earn the love and approval of people who only viewed me as an open wallet and a convenient safety net. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen. It was my dad. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and swiped to answer. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the kitchen counter so I could fold a basket of clean laundry while we talked. Hello, Dad, I said, shaking out a clean white towel and folding it neatly in half. Blythe, thank God you finally answered, my father said. His voice was thick with exhaustion. Please do not hang up on me. We just need to talk about this situation calmly. I am perfectly calm, Dad, I replied, smoothing the edges of the towel. You are the ones who are panicking. He let out a long, heavy sigh that rattled through the speaker. Listen, this whole thing has gotten completely out of hand. Your mother is constantly upset. Tamsin is furious. The trip is a disaster. We are sleeping in terrible places. But you are better than this, Blythe. You are punishing the whole family over one simple miscommunication. Is that really fair? I froze. My hand stopped moving. The towel dropped onto the counter. I gripped the edge of the granite tightly, feeling the cold stone against my palms. Fair? I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, becoming sharp and dangerous. You want to talk to me about what is fair, Dad? Was it fair when you and Mom secretly packed Tamsin's bags and decided I was not important enough to go on the trip I planned? Was it fair when you let Mom take my inheritance from Grandma to bail Tamsin out of debt? Is it fair that I am expected to sacrifice my time, my money, and my happiness just so Tamsin does not have to face reality? That is not what we were trying to do, my father stuttered, his tone immediately turning defensive. We just thought Tamsin needed it more than you did. You are so strong, Blythe. You always handle everything so well. Tamsin struggles. Of course you thought she needed it more, I snapped, picking up the phone and holding it close to my mouth. You always think she needs more. More attention, more money, more support. And I am always the one expected to provide it while you stand by and watch. Well, not anymore. You are an enabler, Dad. You let Mom treat me like garbage because it is easier for you than arguing with her. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear him breathing heavily, but he did not have a single argument left to offer. I do not know what you want me to say, Blythe, he finally whispered. I do not want you to say anything, I replied, my voice remarkably steady. I just want you to understand that I am completely done being an afterthought in my own family. From now on, I am my own priority. Do not call me again until you are back in the country. I ended the call and tossed the phone back onto the counter. I finished folding my laundry with precise, deliberate movements. I did not shed a single tear. I felt incredibly resolute. I spent the next few days monitoring their return flight schedule online. I knew exactly when their plane was supposed to land at the local international airport. When the day finally arrived, I woke up early, made myself a large thermos of hot coffee, and drove across town to their house. I did not park in the driveway. I parked my car on the street, right in front of their manicured lawn. I walked up the concrete path, climbed the wooden steps, and sat down on their large front porch swing. I poured myself a cup of steaming coffee from the thermos, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and simply waited. About an hour later, a bright yellow airport taxi turned onto their quiet suburban street. It slowed down and pulled to a stop directly in front of their driveway. I stayed seated on the porch swing, gently rocking back and forth, as the heavy car doors opened. My parents and Tamsin stepped out onto the pavement. They looked absolutely terrible. My mother's hair was frizzy and unkempt, her clothes wrinkled from the long flight. My father looked pale and exhausted, his shoulders slumped lower than ever. Tamsin looked miserable, wearing the exact same oversized sunglasses and sweatpants she had left in, but she looked far less glamorous now. They walked to the trunk of the taxi while the driver unloaded their heavy suitcases. As the taxi drove away, my mother turned around to walk up the driveway. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting comfortably on her porch swing. "Blythe," my mother said, her voice a mixture of sheer shock and lingering anger. Tamsin immediately dropped the handle of her suitcase. She marched up the driveway, her face twisted into an ugly scowl. "I hope you are incredibly happy with yourself, you spiteful witch," Tamsin snarled, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "You completely ruined my vacation. We had to eat cheap street food and sleep in places that smelled like mold. I am completely exhausted." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I looked down at her from the porch. "I am actually very happy, Tamsin," I said calmly. "But it was not your vacation." "It was my vacation. I planned it, and I paid for it. If you wanted a luxury trip to Europe, you should have gotten a job and paid for it yourself." My mother marched up the steps, her face red with indignation. "How can you speak to your sister that way? We spent the entire 10 days stressed out of our minds because you canceled everything at the last second. We had to use our emergency credit cards to survive. You set us up to fail." I slowly stood up from the porch swing. I set my ceramic coffee mug down on the small wooden table next to me. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked directly into my mother's eyes. I was significantly taller than her, and I used that physical advantage to assert my dominance. "I did not set you up to fail, Mom," I said, my voice projecting clearly in the quiet neighborhood. "I planned a beautiful, thoughtful trip for the three of us to share. I wanted to celebrate my hard work with my parents. You are the ones who decided to cut me out on the front porch without even asking me. You set yourselves up to fail the moment you tried to steal my trip." My father finally spoke up from the driveway, leaning heavily against his luggage. "You did not have to cancel everything, Blythe. That was cruel." I folded my arms across my chest. Why should I have paid for a trip I was not even invited to? Why should my hard-earned salary fund Tamsin's European holiday while she refuses to work? You are incredibly lucky that I did not cancel your return flights as well. I could have left you there permanently. Tamsin rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, mimicking my posture. "You are so unbelievably dramatic. It is just money, Blythe. You have plenty of it. You are so entitled." The sheer hypocrisy of her statement snapped the very last thread of my patience. "Entitled?" I repeated, my voice echoing off the houses across the street. "Do you have any idea how much work, how many late nights, and how much sacrifice went into planning that trip? I missed weekends with my friends. I worked overtime for 2 years. Or do you just assume that luxury hotels and private tours magically appear out of thin air because someone else always takes care of the bill for you?" They stood there on the driveway, completely stunned into silence. They had never heard me raise my voice like this. They were used to the quiet, compliant Blythe who always backed down. "I have spent my entire life being the responsible one in this family," I continued, my voice steady but incredibly firm. "I am the one who fixes the problems. I am the one who plans things. I am the one who makes sure everyone else is comfortable. And you have spent just as long taking every single bit of my effort completely for granted." That is not fair, Blythe, my mother started to say, reaching her hand out toward me. I held up my hand, palm facing out, to stop her instantly. Do not talk to me about fair. What is not fair is how you treat me. You chose Tamsin over me, just like you always do. Every single time. So I made a choice, too. I chose to stop being your doormat. You did not want me on the trip. That is fine. But you do not get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me. I walked over to the porch swing, grabbed my thermos, and picked up my purse. I walked past my mother, down the wooden steps, and right past Tamsin and my father. I am glad you made it back safely, I said, without looking back at them. But do not expect things to go back to the way they were before. Do not call me to fix your problems. Do not ask me for money. I am completely done. If you have made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get back to my story. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots, and got into my car. I put the key in the ignition, started the engine, and drove away without glancing in the rearview mirror. As I navigated through the familiar streets of my hometown, a profound sense of peace washed over my entire body. For years, every visit to my parents' house had left me feeling emotionally drained and inadequate. But today, I felt incredibly light. The invisible chains of familial guilt had finally been shattered. I had said everything I needed to say, and for the first time in my life, I did not care if they were angry with me. When I arrived back at my own house, I walked straight into my home office and sat down at my computer desk. I logged into my bank account. The massive refund from the cancelled European trip was sitting right there in my savings account. It was a substantial amount of money. I stared at the bold numbers on the screen for a long time. That money was meant for a grand, once-in-a-lifetime experience. It was meant to celebrate my hard work and my success. I decided right then and there that I was not going to let it sit in a bank account. I was going to use it for its exact intended purpose, but this time I was going to be the sole beneficiary. I opened a new internet browser tab and typed the words "Solo Travel Ideas Italy" into the search bar. I spent the next 4 hours reading travel blogs, looking at vibrant photographs of ancient architecture, and mapping out a brand new itinerary. I did not consult anyone. I did not ask for permission. I booked a direct, first-class flight to Rome leaving in 2 weeks. I booked a stunning, modern apartment with a terrace overlooking the historical city center. I booked private cooking classes and train tickets to Florence and Venice. 2 weeks later, I was pulling my own suitcase through the international terminal. The airport was loud and chaotic, but I felt a quiet, steady thrill humming in my veins. When the airplane finally touched down in Rome, I looked out the small oval window at the bright Italian sun and knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right decision. My 10 days in Italy were nothing short of magical. I did not have to worry about anyone else's schedule. I did not have to manage anyone else's complaints. I spent my mornings wandering aimlessly through narrow, winding cobblestone streets, breathing in the smell of fresh baked bread and strong espresso. I stood in awe inside the massive walls of the Colosseum. I ate rich, creamy carbonara pasta at tiny, dimly lit cafes tucked into hidden alleyways. One warm afternoon, I bought a large cup of pistachio gelato and sat down on the famous Spanish Steps. The city was bustling with tourists and locals. I pulled a small, leather-bound journal and a pen out of my leather purse. For years, my written goals had always revolved around my family. I wrote about saving money for them, buying them gifts, and making them proud. I opened the journal to a fresh, blank page. I smoothed the paper with my hand. I started to write down new goals that belonged entirely to me. I wanted to learn conversational Italian. I wanted to start a small side business selling vintage clothing online. I wanted to travel to at least 5 more foreign countries before I turned 40. The list grew longer and longer, each bullet point representing a piece of the independent life I wanted to build for myself. On my final night in Florence, I made a reservation at a small, family-owned restaurant situated right along the edge of the Arno River. I sat at a small table by the window, sipping a glass of local red wine. I watched the sun slowly dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of deep orange, vibrant pink, and soft purple. I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of deep inner peace. This trip had not just been a vacation. It was a profound turning point in my life. I realized that I did not need to buy my family's love, and I certainly did not need their approval to be happy. I was entirely enough exactly as I was. When I finally returned home to my quiet house, I felt recharged and ready to start my new chapter. As I was unpacking my suitcase in my bedroom, carefully placing a beautiful ceramic bowl I bought in Venice onto my bookshelf, my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the red button. But I realized I was no longer afraid of her voice. I swiped the green button and answered. "Hello," I said calmly. "Hi, Blythe," my mother said. Her voice was unusually soft, completely stripped of its usual demanding edge. "I saw on social media that you went to Italy. How was your trip?" "It was absolutely incredible," I replied, keeping my tone neutral and guarded. "I had a wonderful time." "That is really good to hear," she said, pausing for a long moment as if she was struggling to find the correct words. "Your father and I have been talking a lot since we got back. We have been thinking about what happened on the porch. Maybe we handled the situation poorly." I stopped unpacking and leaned against my wooden dresser. The admission surprised me, but I was absolutely not ready to let her off the hook that easily. "Poorly?" I asked, my voice firm. "You secretly replaced me on a luxury trip I spent 2 years planning and paying for without even having the decency to ask me first. Calling that poor behavior is a massive understatement, Mom." "I know," she said quietly. I could hear genuine regret in her voice for the first time. We did not realize how much it would hurt you. We thought you would bounce back like you always do. And Tamsin, well, Tamsin knows she behaved terribly. She is very upset about the whole thing." I let out a long breath. "Mom, this was not just about the airplane tickets or the hotels. It is about decades of you putting Tamsin first and expecting me to just smile and pick up the slack. I am not doing it anymore. I am not your backup plan." "I understand," she said softly. "We are going to try to do much better, Blythe. We really do not want to lose you completely. We will give you the space you need right now." "I appreciate you saying that," I told her honestly. "But it is going to take a lot more than one phone call to fix this damage. I need to see actual, real effort from you and Dad, not just apologies." "You will," she promised before we politely ended the call. I set the phone down on the dresser. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was relieved that they were finally acknowledging their toxic behavior, but I was highly skeptical about whether they would actually change their ways. However, as I looked at my new Italian ceramic bowl sitting on the shelf, I realized something incredibly liberating. Whether or not they changed was no longer my responsibility. My responsibility was solely to myself. Over the following months, I kept my newly established boundaries incredibly firm. I did not visit their house every Sunday like I used to. I responded to their calls and text messages only when I felt emotionally prepared to do so. I did not offer them financial advice, and I certainly did not offer them any money. Instead, I poured all of my energy into building the life I had written about in my journal. I signed up for an expensive photography class at the local community center, something I had always dreamed of doing but never had the extra cash or the energy to pursue. I bought a professional camera and spent my weekends exploring nature trails, taking pictures of birds and landscapes. I joined a local hiking group and made new friends who valued my company without expecting anything in return. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was sitting on my back patio with a cup of hot apple cider, watching the wind blow the colorful leaves off the oak tree. I looked at my house, my camera sitting on the table, and thought about the journey I had been on. I was no longer the exhausted, anxious woman who bent over backward for people who did not appreciate her. I was a strong, independent woman who valued her own time, who set strict boundaries, and who was absolutely never afraid to stand up for what she rightfully deserved. I had lost the illusion of a perfect family, but I had finally found myself, and that was worth more than any luxury trip to Europe. If you made it to the very end of this story, thank you so much for listening. Please do me a massive favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below telling me how you would have handled the situation at the airport. Your support means the absolute world to me, and I cannot wait to share my next story with you.